In this video, we're going to discuss the names test. So to be prepared, there's a couple things that you want to have. The first thing that you want to have is you want to go to Blackboard, to our Blackboard page, and in the folder under Course Documents labeled Assessments, you are going to want to scroll down and find the Names Test PDF. This Names Test PDF is going to have all the documents that you need to administer the names test as well as score the names test. So if you want to just open up this document, if you don't have it in front of you already, and notice that it's 8 pages. The first page is a cheat sheet from the article in which, the second article in which the names test was further validated, Deffelmeier et al. From the Reading Teacher 1994. And this is procedures for administering and scoring the names test. So this is kind of your cheat sheet, this first sheet. The second sheet is a protocol sheet for the names test where it has all of the names in which your students are going to be decoding, as well as the scoring portion at the bottom. So this is a sample protocol sheet that you will be using later on in the scoring process. The next sheet is actually the list of names from the names test. So it's taking these same names that are on the protocol sheet, on the sheet before it, page 2, and then just putting it in a list form. This could be used for your students to read off of. If you so choose, you may put the first and last name on a note card, one note card holding both the first and the last name. Instead of the student reading off a list, they could read the note cards. That's an option. And then the next few pages, pages 4 and 5, are the scoring matrix, which you will be using to find patterns in students' mistakes once you've given the assessment and then you're scoring it. And then pages 6, 7, and 8 are an example of a sample protocol for a 3rd grade student, in which I have taken what the authors from Deffelmeier et al. Have given and then calculated the scores, and then circled, using the scoring matrix, circled the errors and mistakes to look for patterns. So you will want to have those 8 pages in front of you as we go through this PowerPoint. You'll find them very helpful. A quick overview: the names test came out of work done by Patricia Cunningham. Many of you know her as sort of the queen of phonics. And the names test was designed to be a quick and dirty assessment of decoding ability. Now, in 1994, 4 years after Cunningham first published the names test, Deffelmeier, Cruz, Merkley, and Fife decided to further validate and enhance the names test. And you will be using the further validated or enhanced version of the names test, which is also often called the augmented names test. So Deffelmeier et al., the article is actually on Blackboard if you're interested in reading it, but all the information you need to administer and score the assessment is within those 8 pages that you printed off from the assessments folder in Blackboard. But the article is on Blackboard if you'd like to read it. Now, the purpose of the names test, like I said earlier, is to quickly assess the decoding ability of individual students. So the assessment is designed to specifically assess students' knowledge of grapheme-phoneme relationships. And if you remember, a grapheme is a letter or group of letters that represent one sound or one phoneme. And so in the names test, you find those grapheme phoneme or letter sound relationships embedded within the individual names that the students read. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about how the 2 assessments were developed. The original names test, as you remember, is by Patricia Cunningham. There were 25 names on that assessment. They were uncommon, yet they were fully decodable. So something similar to the idea of a nonsense word, but it not being completely nonsense. And within those 25 names, there were common English spelling patterns or common graphophonemic patterns. And there was a balance of long and short names. The test had a possible of 50 points, that being each name on the list has a first name and a second name, with each name having a point. So for 25, at 2 points each, you get 50 points. An average second grader score was around 22.5 points. And Cunningham then reported that the average fifth grade score was quite higher, being 47.3 points out of 50, with the lowest fifth grade score being around 40. Now, though that information may be interesting, it's not particularly all that helpful. That's why Deffelmeyer et al. Augmented the NAEMS test. They revised it to include grade average percent correct scores, as well as 10 more names to include all possible graphophonemic patterns. So they revised the test to improve reliability. Patricia Cunningham's first NAEMS test had lower reliability, whereas the augmented NAEMS test has much higher reliability, Cronbach's alpha 0.9 and higher. And they added all phonics areas to be represented, all graphophonemic patterns, and they reported the scores by grade level and compared them to the ITBS, which is given in some places now, but was a fairly popular test in 1994 when this assessment was validated. And the names were reordered by difficulty, with the easier names being towards the beginning and the harder names being towards the end, meaning the more complex graphophonemic patterns towards the end, and the names towards the end of the list. The augmented NAEMS test had a possible 70 points with 35 names, 35 first names, 35 last names. And Deffelmeyer et al. Decided to norm this information by providing grade level equivalent averages. And so you can see here the list for second, third, fourth, and fifth grade scores with regard to average percent correct scores, with the average being 63% for second, 73% for third, 89 for fourth, and 92 for fifth. And so when we are calculating the percent correct score for our students, this particular piece allows us to say whether or not, based on the data from this assessment, whether or not the student's decoding ability is on grade level, on average, below average, or above average. And so while it allows us to say a little something with regard to grade level, it really doesn't inform our instruction. What informs our instruction is later on when we use the scoring matrix to find patterns that the student has difficulty with, and then also to find the patterns that the student has mastery of, so that we can then use our if-then thinking to better inform instruction. So what do we need in order to give the NAEMS test? It's very simple to give. You need a copy of the list of names for the student, or each individual first and last name on one note card, so meaning that you would have 35 note cards total with the first and last name on each note card. I have given the NAEMS test using both procedures. Some students like to have the list of names on a clipboard, and I tell them, just as the directions for the assessment say, to act like you're taking roll and you're reading this pretend class list name off, and allowing them to check and be very official, like they're the teacher. Other students have been overwhelmed by that, and they prefer having it on a note card. So I'm going to leave that up to your professional judgment, but know that that option is there. You'll also need a pen or a pencil for yourself and a copy of the list of the names for yourself. Now, you could use, if you liked, you could use the protocol sheet for the NAEMS test if you feel like that gives you enough room to write. If it doesn't, then you may want to use the sample list that was given on page 3 of your packet for the NAEMS test. And obviously a quiet space to work in. So how do you administer the NAEMS test? And you have students read the list as if they're calling attendance, just like I said earlier. So you can make that as official as you want to. You write a check above the name if the student pronounces the name correctly. If they do not pronounce the name correctly, you write the phonetic spelling above the name that is mispronounced. So let's take a look at the samples so that you can get a better idea of exactly what that looks like. So let's go to page 6 of your packet on the names test, and you'll see here that the Duffelmeyer et al. Have given us an example, and you can see in the very first example for John J. Conway that the student says J correctly, but instead of saying Conway says Conver. And the test administrator has writings later on to find patterns. Now, once you have administered it and you're ready to score it, first thing you want to do is you want to total the number of first and last names read correctly. Remember, there are 35 first and last names with a 70 points total, meaning 1 point for each first name, 1 point for each last name. You're going to add this total number of points up and divide this by the number of names used. So that's going to look like, going back to our example, here we have little Jimmy, and Jimmy read 45 names correctly. I counted up the checks. I divided it by 70, being the total number of names, and Jimmy read 64% of the names correctly. Now, if I think about the table that I showed you earlier, which you can also find that information on this first page down here, Jimmy as a third grade level at 64% is below grade level. Not dramatically, but he's below grade level. So I would report with regard to percent correct, this student was below grade level based on the data from the names test. What does mean something to people who know something other than the names test is that what patterns the student read correctly, and then what patterns the student mispronounced or missed. So you're going to use the scoring matrix, table 4, to circle the letter or letter patterns that are missed or mispronounced. Then you're going to transfer this information to the protocol sheet, which is table 5. So let's take a look at that. So here is the scoring matrix. And I'll show you Jimmy's scoring matrix. So Jimmy's scoring matrix, I circled all of the letter or letter patterns, groups of letters, in which Jimmy either read incorrectly or missed. And I used that based on the data found in table 5. So hopefully you see the correlation without me needing to go into too much detail about that, where that came from. Now, where I get the heart of my information is then being able to look at the patterns that are the graphophonemic patterns that are missed frequently. This gives me an idea of what needs to be explicitly taught and retaught. So then I can look at this information on the table here on this table, and I can see what types of errors the student is making. As I look at the first two phonics categories, the graphophonemic categories, I see initial consonants that the student, Jimmy, has only missed 2 out of that. And I look to see what type of what those 2 were, and I see that it has to do probably with the hard and soft C and G rules, those phonics generalizations. So I think to myself, well, I see where has he had more difficulty and more errors. I see that down here when I look at the long vowels, he's had much more difficulty with the long vowels, specifically with regard to the VCE final E pattern. So that tells me that's probably an area in which he needs more explicit instruction in. And I see that there are more areas here where he has difficulty with vowels. So clearly vowels would be an area of instruction. What's interesting is when I give the Words Their Way spelling inventory, that data may help me better understand the names test data, as well as when I'm looking at my students running records. Is Jimmy having difficulty with long vowel patterns, specifically words with the vowel consonant final E pattern? I may even want to give another running record that perhaps is in controlled text or decodable text where there are lots of words with the vowel consonant final E pattern to see how he does with that. So you can see how analyzing this information can then help inform my instruction, whereas looking at the total percent correct score doesn't really help inform my instruction, though it's interesting and it says something about grade level with regard to this assessment. It doesn't necessarily inform my instruction. So, these scoring and analysis procedures can all be found on the first page of your packet. So don't worry, it's all there. What I would encourage you to do is to read through the different pages, and look through them and get an idea for what the assessment looks like. Read through the list of names, and if you have any questions about those names, feel free to email me. Now, really quick before I end this video, the names test has many strengths, but it also has many weaknesses. It's informal, it's easy to use, and it's a very quick assessment. It does not take much time, and I could do it if I have some students in second grade that I'm a little bit, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, that I'm a little bit worried about with regard to decoding. I could pull them very quickly and have administer the names test and it not take a lot of instructional time. Assessment. Also, another strength is obviously that the certain spelling patterns or graphophonemic patterns are embedded in each of the names. But students may want to change names into real words. So this assessment does not account for dialect or cultural differences, which is one of the biggest problems with the names test. And it's clearly too difficult for beginning readers in lower elementary grades. However, there is an early names test for younger readers that can be found in your text in the phonics and decoding chapter, in which Nancy Mather and her colleagues have adapted the names test for younger readers. However, the current augmented names test is too difficult for younger readers. And clearly, it does not address sight word knowledge. These are decodable words, they're not irregular words, so it's only looking at the ability to apply graphophonemic knowledge to simple word patterns. It also does not measure reading fluency or rate, and it does not measure reading comprehension. So it's a very specific diagnostic informal assessment that allows me to look very closely at decoding ability with regard to graphophonemic patterns. So the names test hopefully will not be too difficult to give. You may run into a little bit more difficulty trying to score the data using the matrix and then analyzing the data. But a lot of times the difficulty that students have in scoring and analyzing is because they're feeling a little worried about their own graphophonemic knowledge. So I would encourage you to read through the assessment, have all your materials ready, and be prepared to not only administer it, but also be prepared to score and analyze it. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.